Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about the Wheel of Time. And this is part 3 of me being more or less angry about The Dragon Reborn, which is book 3. I was fairly nice, I think, yesterday when we talked about the second quarter, so to speak. Will that stay the same today? Who knows? Well, I know. Kinda. Anyway, this is about chapters. Oh gods, I forgot the numbers. The Woman of Tanjiko, which is I think chapter 31, and we're going all the way up to chapter 43 or thereabouts, which is probably easing the badger again. So there we go. Let's get this kind of thing started, right? Cheers. All right. So, what do we have today? We do have everyone moving further along to Tyr, which is where this time around we'll get our big showdown, which I assume will become, I know at this point because I finished actually reading the book today, but I don't want to do all of it in one video, I think. So, yeah, let's try. So they're going all to Tyr for the big showdown. And most of this video today will be about Perrin, Matt, and the girls. In those 3 trips, they're all going their own ways. Matt is technically still on his way to Camelin to deliver a letter from, what's her name? Elaine to her mother, Morghese. The girls are on their way to Tyr to do whatever they want to do with the Black Aja, which is, I don't know. And, yes. Perrin and gang are on their way following Rand. There's stuff happening in between and stuff that I forgot to talk about before, and we'll figure that stuff out on the way. So, the plotting is fairly okay today, I would say. It's not so much in how the pacing and plotting works. It's sort of like travel sequences that show us, or are meant to show us, sort of like the overall picture. There's some good there and there's some bad there. And then there's all the other stuff that basically boils down again to the fact that Robert Jordan is just not a very good writer. I've said that before and I'll stand by it. Robert Jordan is not a good writer. He may be a good storyteller, that's something that we need to figure out over time, but he's not a good writer. I make a difference between those two. I've said it before, like, there are people that have really cool ideas for stories, and there are people that are really good with language. Robert Jordan sucks at language. Whether he's good with stories or not is something that is still sort of out there. We'll find out over time, I guess. But here we are. He sucks at language, and that makes some parts difficult to figure out here. Or not just language, just like actually putting down his ideas in this format. He would also benefit from a lot of editing, but we don't get that. So let's go through all 3 groups individually and figure out what is good, what is bad, and if there's generalizations to be had, because generalizing is what I'm best at. Unfounded generalizations are what I'm best at, I guess. So Matt, after fleeing the city, or trying to flee the city, goes on a gambling spree. We kind of end it there. He goes on a gambling spree. He can win everything right now. He's super fucking lucky now, even more than before. Uncannily lucky. And after relying more and more on his luck, he gets attacked by people who we can probably assume, safely assume are Grey Men or Soulless, which have come up as one of the new monsters that the dark side has, and does the really dumb but cool thing of throwing himself off a bridge with the guy that is trying to kill him, landing on that guy, thus breaking his fall and killing the dude that was supposed to kill him. That's sort of where we ended yesterday, and I kind of approve of this because it kind of shows what's going on. It's also a bit like high action and whatnot. And I've read more ridiculous action scenes than that one. It just came kind of out of nowhere. And we still need to figure out Matt's character, because I have issues with Matt's character there and later on and overall. However, he is there, it's like, oh shit, I've gambled enough now. I've won like gold, 2 purses full of gold coins at this point. It's like, let's just go into this one inn, which is not a bar, I guess, sort of like into this one place and sit there and drink something and eat something and wait for the first ship so I can go off to, well, Camelin, I guess. So that's his plan. He goes in there, and whom do we meet but our old friend whom I was asking for when he will show up, Tom Maryland, because of course we need Tom Maryland as well. The only one that's missing so far is Captain Doman, and well, we'll see if he shows up or not. Yeah, well, we'll see. Anyway, Tom's there playing harp or doing something and whatnot. Matt is like waiting for him. Tom shows up and is drunk as fuck because Tom decided to join the game of the house again at the end of when we met him last in Great Hunt, leaving burning Carrion behind him, is apparently full of self-loathing and is drowning himself and his self-loathing in wine. So what's better than just to go with our good buddy Matt down to Camelin? Because, well, there's his first love, Queen Morghese. So he can, kill himself with self-loathing and romantic foolery. Which is exactly what Matt tells him, and Tom goes along. Now, as meetings go, I've read of worse plotted ones. But this one's already a bit, I don't know, and see, this is sort of like the issue that I have with Matt's characters. Like, not only is he Taveran, which we need to talk about at some point, how that is a problematic device. Now he's also super fucking lucky, and with that kind of with those traits and those narrative elements, Robert Jordan can use Matt to get out of any possible fix, because he can just like say, oh, by the way, random thing. It's like Deus Ex Machina without any Deus, because there's only the fucking creator. And we need to talk about that cosmology, because it doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever at this point. Because if you want to do dualism, figure it out, Bobby J. Don't just assume shit. Anyway, so they go on the ship, they get attacked by more people with knives and that kind of stuff. They end up, leaving the boat and riding towards Camelin. That's sort of like the arc. Now, why do I have issues with that one? So here's the thing. We've seen Matt only through other people's eyes so far up until this point. Which, yeah, may be different than what we see now, because now we have his person. Up to now, he was sort of like the slightly childish, trickster, prankster kind of dude, right? So he has crazy ideas, he wants to do them. He's not about playing pranks or tricks on people. He may steal if he gets the chance, because, why not? And that's it. But he's mostly in there to have a good time and maybe have some adventures. That's sort of what he wants. No responsibilities and, risk and thrill. That's sort of like Matt's thing. And then we start out with him like, well, I gotta go and gamble a bit. Because apparently he always gambled. So he wants to gamble a bit, and he thinks that he's good at cards, he's good at dice and whatnot. So he wants to gamble a bit to gain some money. We've seen that before when he goes and does the quarterstaff thing. Fuck the quarterstaff thing. Anyway, point is, he's like, yeah, you know what, I'll just gamble a bit so I have enough money so I can live, pay for my way down to Camelin, which makes a lot of sense. And then he gets throughout this story, into like master capitalist Mathram Coffrin, which is like gambling at every opportunity to get more and more and more and more and more wealth. Now, could that be lasting influence of the Dagger of Shadar Logoth? Possibly. but I doubt that. I don't think Robert Jordan is as subtle as that. He just kind of decides to switch that kind of thing with Matt over time. It's like throughout that part of the story, he becomes more and more greedy over time, and that's just weird because it's like, yeah, I'll do nothing for free. I'll help people if they pay for it and whatnot, which is sort of what we get later in that chapter, Hero in the Night, in the Dark. But it doesn't come across as that. Like his sudden greediness and callousness and like I do nothing for free kind of thing feels so forced here in like weird ways. Like yeah, he wins like hundreds of gold pieces basically from the captain on the riverboat, from everyone, and he never gets accused of cheating. And he just keeps on going because why not? I need to get more and more and more and more and more gold. And it's like, yes, I know there's that sort of like heart of gold kind of thing, rushing into the house to save the children, which is that story that I think the Amerlin seat tells him. I'm confusing that stuff already. Point is, it feels forced because, once again, Robert Jordan is not a subtle writer or plotter or anything. So when he does actually go and help that Illuminator, I already forgot her name again, but it's the same one from Carrion, of course, because there's only 500 people in this world, I guess. He suddenly has no problem giving her money. It's like, either you, boy Matt, don't care about fucking money and it's all for the gambling and the game for you, which I can get as a character thing, then that's totally in character to give her money, or you're a greedy motherfucker. And then you would not do that. But the heart of gold, like callous exterior kind of thing, just feels forced and wrong with Matt. Especially since we see it through his eyes. We don't get like any like really, I don't know, proper thought processes going on there that explain what he's doing. It just doesn't make any sense. Speaking of characters that don't make any sense, our girl gang is in full catfight mode at this point, especially Egwene and Nynaeve. And once again, we come to the main criticism here. Robert Jordan is not a subtle writer. Because I can get the idea of Nynaeve and Egwene, or Egwene trying to emancipate herself from Nynaeve, Nynaeve still having like, that like motherly feeling or whatever, like feeling of responsibility towards the younger girl. That part makes sense. I can live with that. That's the idea behind it. And Robert Jordan is probably right with bringing that up. Also, we finally learned that there's like a 7-year age difference between Nynaeve and Egwene. Which, though I'm still not sure how old anyone is, means that if Nynaeve is 16, it would, at the beginning of the book, which kind of is one of those ideas that I had, then Nynaeve is 23 or 24 at the beginning of the book, which sort of, and makes Matt and Rand around 18, and thus 5 years younger than Nynaeve. I thought they were 2 or 3 years younger. Anyway, doesn't really matter either. It's like, who fucking cares? So having a conflict of, Egwene trying to be more herself and Nynaeve becoming, just trying to remain sort of responsible and whatnot, and almost in charge of Egwene makes a lot of sense. But the way it is done, it feels so dumb, right? It's like, this is like at least 1 year. It's like they're like 25 and 17, maybe a bit more at this point. It's like if you are not in a really like mother-daughter kind of relationship there, which they are not, then I don't know. You should not behave that way. It's unrealistic the way they, like, Egwene is like questioning everything that Nynaeve is saying, and Nynaeve on the other hand is just giving orders and not explaining anything. It's like, you've gone through a shitload of like really traumatizing stuff, and you decide to run off together to do something really dumb, and we need to repeat this. This is a really dumb idea, and the fact that apparently the Amerlin seed boss witch of the entire fucking country, the entire fucking continent, has nothing better to do than send like 3 kids out to deal with like 13 terrorists is ridiculous and unrealistic as fuck. But then again, that's sort of like your magic girl school or magic school story in any case, so I can forgive that as just a terrible trope. However, well, but they're out there. They're doing these tough things, but all they do is bicker and bicker and bicker and bicker all the fucking time on their way down there. It's just like trying to show each other up every single situation. And they're fighting for their fucking lives. I don't know why Robert Jordan thought this was in any way realistic. Like, Nynaeve is behaving like a bitch, and Egwene is behaving like a bitch. And they're just like, I don't know. I feel sorry for Elaine at this point. Which is insane because she's the privileged one there, and I should probably hate her for that. But it was like, it just feels dumb, and it makes me angry and make me sad because you could actually make an interesting dynamic out of that and explore that whole like coming of age, emancipation from authority figures and whatnot kind of thing. That would be really interesting. But instead, it's just like, oh, those are women. They'll just bitch at each other, kind of thing. It's like, that's a cliche that we could probably do without, because I feel certain that women are capable of dealing with these kinds of conflicts in a more nuanced way, or maybe even setting that aside under, threat of life, which we kind of get here. So there's that. Like an overarching thing here. But we'll get back to like the crudity of Robert Jordan again and again, because it's sledgehammer writing. Anyway, the other thing that we have here, obviously, there's 2 things there that are interesting, or sort of interesting in their plotline, which is like, leave the tower, take a boat, leave the boat for dumb reasons, find Aiel, because suddenly there's more Aiel than mushrooms in that fucking country at this point, and who knows, do dumb things with Aiel, behave dumbly with the Aiel, move on, get kidnapped, get freed by the Aiel, move on. That's sort of like our plot line here. So we need to talk Aiel, and we need to talk the other bit there as well. Okay, I was angry already. Let's be nice for a second. The fact that Nynaeve can only channel the one power when she's angry is a really cool gimmick up to a point, because that situation when she's trying to heal that one Aiel girl, and just yells at her and yells at everyone because she's trying to build up enough anger to then go and do and to actually start channeling. I like that bit. That's an interesting quirk there, and I like that. And I just want to point that out because, as I said, I'll try to be kind to Bobby J whenever I can. So yeah, well done, Bobby J. That's an interesting knack there. It's cool. Just don't overuse it. Which, of course, he does. But, there we are. So, we get the Aiel. We get Robert Jordan trying to talk about a culture, which, as you well know, so far has not worked very well. At least, that's sort of what I said before. Now we meet the Fremen. The Aiel. We met them before once. Remember that one Aiel man that Perrin and Matt meet with Ingtar? Yes. So, who's all about, like, water and stuff. So we know the Aiel are supposed to be fierce fighters out of a desert, always looking for water, and having weird customs that no one understands, but everyone fears them as the fiercest fighters on the planet. And as we all know, Rand needs to develop desert power because the have air power or whatever. No, my point is, the Aiel are this desert tribe that is all like extremely dangerous and has like a weird culture that no one knows. They're waiting for their own messiah, which yeah. And we kind of meet them now, and there's obviously also fighting women, which is apparently a huge thing in this world that is sort of matriarchal, because apparently it's women running everything, but women are not allowed to fight outside that one desert tribe. Like, okay. Oh, and Battle Aja, which I suspect do some fighting sometimes, who knows? And whoever is hunting the horn. Well, apart from horny women, the only ones allowed to fight are apparently maidens of the spear. Now, should there be that whole like maiden thing in there? Probably not, but then again, the weird mixture of sexuality and fighting is something that we can also see in our general mythology and depiction of, say, or the invention, the invention of the Amazonians or the Amazons, basically. That's not nothing new. And in general, the idea is like, yeah, if I hadn't read Dune before, the Aiel would feel cool. I assume there's more to come. So far, it's more like they don't understand the Aiel. The Aiel are just not are incapable of actually talking to like non-Aiel about stuff like water and figuring out that other people have different cultures. Apparently, that doesn't work. So you can live in a desert and not talk to anyone for ages, and still assume that everyone else will behave the same way as you. That's sort of where I have an issue there. It's like you have a unique culture that has all these like prejudices against, and that side makes sense, right? The side from what's their name, like Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine makes sense. They're like, yeah, the Aiel are strange. We only know so little about them, so we'll have to ask and figure out stuff, or go along our myths and weird stories that are told about them. That side makes sense, but apparently the Aiel, when they're answering their question or trying to talk to them, are like, yeah, well, why don't you understand that it's like this? It's like, how can you live in a fucking desert behind the dragon wall, which apparently is a mountains and shit. Anyway, how can you live in a fucking desert, not talk to anyone, and assume that everyone else will understand your customs? That also, the whole like fear of water feels a bit overdone and a bit overblown and a bit too cliche or too cheesy to me. It's like, yeah, that those people might not be happy with a lot of like actual ocean. I get that. Large rivers can be frightening, but everything beyond that, like, how can people swim? That is insane. It's like, I don't know. I feel a bit once again one of those like not so clever stereotypes going on that you also see in, say, George R. R. Martin when it's the Dothraki, those I will not say Mongols kind of culture has issues putting their like horses on ships because it's the Great Salt Ocean, which is so dangerous. And now I'm sure that people that like if you have that kind of culture that is not used to sea travel, that you're afraid of them or scared of them or whatever, I can understand that, but I'm pretty sure it's not that dumb. How come that when every time we talk about some more like tribal culture, suddenly as writers go into like all dumb metaphor speech and I don't know. I think there's something in there that merits further exploration, but I'm not the one to do it right now. Anyway, so that encounter in general is sort of weird, but also okayish. They just feel like very, very Fremen to me, but then again, we've only seen them like once, not twice now, so there may be way more going on that we will see in later books when we get more, what they're called, Fremen, not Fremen, Aiel, I guess. What goes on then? Well, they leave. I want to leave them behind as quickly as possible because Nynaeve wants to, I guess, run to fucking Tyr and behaves once again like really dumb, so they just run on and run into a trap and get captured by brigands because the land is in war, obviously. And we'll talk about that at the end of this bit, I guess. I need to talk about it more tomorrow. Or later, depending on when I record the next video. Point is, they get captured and then with the aim of being sold to someone as slaves once one assumes. So we come to the point where Robert Jordan is not really capable of figuring out whether he wants to write adult fantasy or YA fantasy. Which is, there is the hint at sexual violence going on there. But he kind of talks around it, but it's important that the threat is there. The crude suggestions and whatnot. But he never gets beyond that because he cannot, because it's basically a children's book that he's writing there, a children's story there, maybe YA story, so he cannot actually mention sexual violence, but the threat is there in the back, and that makes it so weird and uncomfortable to read sometimes, that he has that sexual undertone in there, but never actually puts it out up front. Now, obviously, they are supposed to be sold to Murdroll and start shooting all kinds of magic, and are rescued by the Aiel again, because the Aiel obviously follow them. And we already know if such a chapter is called The Weaving of the Web or something like that, or The Weave, Patterns of the Weave within the Pattern, something like that. One of those chapters, you already know those people will show up again. It's basically built-in spoilers at this point. But then again, I guess in 1992, whenever that was written, 1991, I guess, no one was complaining about spoilers much because we didn't have the internet to rant at people that spoil stuff. So we have that whole thing going on there. So when they are freed, and there's an issue there which we need to talk about, the general power creep. I won't call it power creep, I guess. Because suddenly we have Balefire. I mean, it was mentioned in one of what's her name's Egwene's dreams, and now out of nowhere, Nynaeve knows how to shoot that stuff, and that's sort of like the weird thing that Robert Jordan, for someone who is in that dumb interview fragment that is always put at the end of all these audiobooks, always talks about how he uses his editor and his audiobooks that he will then go and listen to and whatnot, how he uses those to figure out stuff, foreshadowing that he doesn't put in. He tends to just drop like all kinds of new powers and shit out of nowhere without any explanation. Suddenly people can do that kind of stuff. Suddenly Egwene and Nynaeve can do all kinds of complex magic weavings there. It's like, that does not make any sense. You should learn that shit in a proper way and not just intuitively figure out new stuff on the fly all the fucking time. So oftentimes feels like he comes up with like new enemies and he puts those foes into the book, and then suddenly you're shit, I need to power up my characters at the same time so they can still fight them, and he just drops in those weapons, magical weapons or magical powers or whatever on the side and upgrades them on the fly because he forgot to actually build up to that kind of thing later on, like earlier on. We have bits of that in here as well. Anyway, so they just like go on another boat and try to go directly to Tyr to do Tyr things in Tyr, which no one really understands what they're going to do there, but flush out the Black Aja. See, that's sort of like my issue that I had with all three books now. Right? It's like that at some point, everyone has to go to that one place, new place on the map for the big showdown. And the longer you think about it, the less sense it makes for everyone to go there. Like, Rand has a reason to go to Tyr. Moiraine, probably also. The rest, sort of like, no. If you have, like, any idea that there's, like, Black Aja in fucking Tyr, and you tell the Amerlin seat, their idea is to send like 3 girls out there. That's ridiculous. And so you give them like new magical powers on the way there because suddenly you need that stuff. I don't know, it became so frustrating again because there's actually, the overall like pacing and whatnot of this, like everyone going down the river, makes a lot of sense. You see suddenly the land is in, like, there's war over everywhere. There is the depiction of, famine. There's a question of like Morghese maybe closing the border to people that are to refugees and stuff. You could actually make like put in like some moral stuff in there. question of like, could another country take in those refugees? You can talk all about that stuff, but they don't. It's like, it just happens in the backdrop, and probably the answer. And we'll talk about the answer tomorrow because that chapter is like later on. Anyway, it just felt sort of aimlessly moving towards that big showdown there, with unlikable characters or characters doing unlikable things and becoming more and more unlikable. Let's talk about Perrin, because Perrin's arc is sort of better, I guess. And that's, you know, they're following Rand. They're having adventures in another city, another town, I guess, where an Aielman is hung up in a cage. And Perrin frees the Aielman, so he's also, you know, meets, you know, more Aiel, and it's kind of mixed up with that. They pick up a new companion, which is that Falcon girl, Hawk Falcon. I keep, you know, confusing that. I think it's a Falcon. You know, Falcon, yes. And then they go on to Ilion. And obviously end up in the same fucking inn as Doman, Captain Doman was in before. Because apparently, yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. So we have a bit more of the dream stuff. Perrin obviously can also go into the dream world. He meets Hopper there as his spirit guide, sort of as his dream guide, which is cool because Hopper was a really cool wolf in the beginning in Eye of the World. And there's one good thing that I really liked, almost an emotional scene. So I want to mention that because I've already started bashing it again. So I want to mention that. The scene when he meets Hopper and actually finally talks to Hopper and is not just afraid of Hopper. And in the dream world, and Hopper finally can actually fly as a wolf in Dreamland, he can actually fly. That was really touching. With Hopper being like his true self in the spirit world, where he can actually fly, which he always wanted to do, right? That's sort of like where his name comes from. He jumped super high because he wanted to fly. That really, I liked that. That was emotional. It was a bit cheesy, almost Disney cheesy, but it was nice. So I want to point that out because that made me happy. Apart from that, Perrin does stuff because no one really knows why, not least of all Perrin. And they pick up that girl whose name I have already forgotten. I want to call her Nazarene, but I'm pretty sure that's not her name. She later claims Fael because that's like Falcon, and that kind of harkens into Min's weird prophecy. Who just, I don't know, follows Perrin. Now there's a bunch of sort of okayish things going on there, because in the background we already knew that there is the great hunt for the horn, and we meet some hunters here which are claiming to have fought the Aielmen, and obviously they're noblemen, they're drunk, they're assholes, they, you know, are arrogant, and they claim all kinds of stuff that did not actually happen. They're like unlikable from the first second on, because, you know, that's how Robert Jordan writes. All noblemen are arrogant or noble, and there's nothing in between. So, I don't know. Now we get like a big action scene with Perrin, because we need to come to that point where Perrin really does not like to kill, is sort of a pacifist. That's kind of built up here, but he still, you know, fights to defend. See, I like Perrin as a character. Perrin is a nice dude. But his stuff is kind of boring because he has like so little like agency. He has like no motives. He's just tagging along so far and following his like instincts or whatever, or the pattern. I don't know. I just didn't really work that well. We get like a bit of a dream sequence when he meets, what's her name, Lanfear, and we finally get yes, this is Lanfear, not just Selene reveal that we already knew from like the start, basically, because that's how bad Robert Jordan is with foreshadowing when he actually uses it. And then, as I said, they end up in Ilion at the, what's the place? Yeah, we end up in Ilion, which is sort of like Venice. I feel it's either Venice or Amsterdam, but it feels more like Venice because it's all warm and whatnot. However, you know, we end up there. They end up at the same inn because, yeah. And then more of the Grey Men show up, and Perrin is able to smell them with his wolf powers, whereas the Warder, Lan, and Moiraine are not able to detect them until it's almost too late. They kill them, and that's sort of where that ends for today with Perrin. So what are my issues with Perrin? Let's go at it. Alright, so the introduction of a new character is okay. Yeah, so they find him releasing the Aiel man, so we get more like Aiel conversation, and my water is yours, and whatnot. Yeah. Plus, we get like another hint of why the Aiel men might also all want to go to Tyr, because they're talking about, yeah, we're going to Tyr, and they're like, well, let's just follow that. No one actually tells them that they're like their savior and their white savior will be Rand in Tyr. We don't say that explicitly, but that's sort of like where this is sort of pointing. Nazreen just following them because he's into adventure. Yeah. We reach the next point where also everyone is just angry at everyone, and Moiraine is like bitchy towards everyone, and everyone is bitchy towards Moiraine, and so forth. I just felt that whole storyline felt rather like, I don't know, aimless, I guess. They're just like, yeah, I have to get my characters down there, so I'll do it that way. I'll just, do a bit of like sightseeing on the way, and I'll just like send them down the river, and that's it. Well, yeah. That's sort of how that goes. Now, where do I want to go with this? As I said, they also are at Easing the Badger, which is a kind of cool name for a bar, I guess. But here's a thing, like, for whatever reason, and this is not just a failing of Robert Jordan, it's definitely a failing of a lot of fantasy worlds or fantasy authors. It's like, for whatever reason, you have an entire city. It's supposed to be one of the biggest cities of the continent. But every person, all characters that ever come to that town, end up in the same fucking restaurant, in the same fucking inn. And there's supposed to be hundreds of them. It's like having, Moiraine go to the same place every time. Makes sense. But why does it have to be the same one as the one of Captain Doman before? No reason whatsoever. It kind of makes those supposedly huge places feel like, feel smaller than they're supposed to be. It feels unrealistic, but be that as it may, I can live with that. Let's look at like one final thing, and that is sort of passage of time and world events. Now, obviously, this is supposed to be a huge world, right? And time moves on. There's something going on in the past, in the background, and there's hints, right, when they're on that like Tyrion vessel. The captain talks to Matt about that new High Lord in Tyr who wants to wage war against Illian and is all about that. And we know there's war in Cairhien for whatever fucking reason. And we learn that in Illian there's also everyone is unhappy. So we know the world in general has become a more dangerous, weirder place. Now there's like one thing that I find problematic with that. It's like, that's fine. I also understand why Matt does not know shit about it, because Matt has been in a coma for like the last month or so. But why Varen, when she was still around as a character, why, Egwene, why Elaine, why Nynaeve never talk to, they're talking to people. They're talking to, what's his name, like Elaine's brother and half-brother. Why Tom, who's a fucking gleeman, he's hanging out in bars all the time, and no one ever like figures this out until they're suddenly on the river like, holy shit, the entire riverbank is on fire. What happened there? It just feels weird, because on the other hand, right, Moiraine also doesn't understand it, and she was like sitting in the mountains, but she was getting like messages from everyone all the fucking time. It's like there was all these people coming up to Moiraine and telling her all the news, and they, like, no one expects the entire world to be at war, and it just kind of pops up when Jordan needs it, but it never is there when it, like, it's not building up properly in the background is what I'm trying to say here. It's, once again, what I would call like one of the failings of this book series so far is that the world the cultures feel like very like thin, flimsy backdrops that can be exchanged whenever they are needed to be exchanged. Almost like in a theater, right? Like on the stage when you just like draw up one backdrop and put in a second one. It feels like that. The world is all fine, and then we drop down the war backdrop because now war is on. Because it just feels so crude. All of this it has potential. It has a lot of potential. We see there's some sort of dynamic there between Baalzamon and what's her name, Lanfear. That might have some like future potential because she's maybe not fully under his control. And we have like other hints that there is more going on in the world, that people may actually develop some motives. But I start to lose hope that Robert Jordan will do any of those things justice, because whenever he wants to do something and sets out to do something, it becomes so in your face that it just makes me sad or annoyed or all kinds of things. So let's wrap this up and let's wrap this up and maybe find some positive things to talk about at the end. All right, so everyone is traveling towards Tyr. Everyone's characters are suddenly changing more than I mentioned already. Not all of that makes a lot of sense, but at least we found Tom Marilyn again. Apart from that, I mean, we find some more new characters with Fail. I forgot her name. So Perrin gets some sort of love interest or tension there as well. And the threat level is ratcheted up because, we need that for the big showdown. Let's talk about the showdown tomorrow, shall we? I'm a bit tired. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this more than I did. I hope you have opinions. If you have, let me know in the comments and we'll talk about it some more. And until then, cheers.